So John von Neumann is a pretty famous economist, and here's how he defines a game. A game is a collection of players. It's a set of actions for each player, and it's a payoff function for each player that maps the action taken by all players into a real number, which is that player's utility. So this is pi I is map actions of player 1, the actions of player 2, up until the actions of player n, and then it converts all of those actions into some number. And that number represents how happy this player is given the actions. And then the final piece is a timing protocol that specifies who gets to choose what, when.
Sorry, did you say those actions are per player or all players?
Each player could have different sets of actions. So
the R, I mean, is that mapping all players' actions?
Right. So
R?
Each player has a function, and they call it the payoff function, and that payoff function maps n sets of actions into a number. And so it'll take one value from each of these actions, and then it turns those n numbers into, or those n actions into a single number. And there's one payoff function for each individual.
Oh, okay, I see that now. Okay.
But yeah, so like a set of actions for each player is, we could have the same action. So we'll talk about the prisoner's dilemma in a second. In that case, we can either rat each other out or we can keep silent. But it could also be, so Twitch had this example a few years ago where they had like a collective group of people playing Pokemon, and everyone, I guess in that case, they all had the same actions. But there's games where like I could move left or right and you move up or down. And so we have different actions, but we're kind of both taking those, we both want to take our set of actions and we want to turn that cross product into a payoff. Okay, and I want to put a warning here because lots of people will appeal to quote unquote game theory by just saying, like, just kind of waving their hands, and they won't tell you the collection of players. They won't tell you the actions for each player. They won't tell you payoff functions, and they won't tell you a timing protocol. Now, if you kind of leave yourself open where you can make up any of these on the fly without actually saying it out loud, you can tell yourself whatever story you want. So if someone wants to justify something using game theory and they don't formalize it, you should mostly ignore them. Okay, so we've now defined what a game is. So the interesting piece of game theory isn't always, it's interesting to think about the game, but thinking about the game without thinking about equilibrium isn't that useful. So what's an equilibrium? An equilibrium in general is going to be some strategy for each player. So they could either take a single action, so they could either go up or down or left or right, or they could do a probability distribution over their actions. So I could say I'm going left with 50% and right with 50%. And that is also a strategy. And so an equilibrium is a strategy for each player such that some set of conditions is met. Now, what are these conditions? I think it's best to talk about a particular type of equilibrium. So we've probably mostly heard of a Nash equilibrium. And this is, I was meant to insert an image here. So the most famous equilibrium concept people have learned about is a Nash equilibrium. So what's a Nash equilibrium? A Nash equilibrium is a strategy for each player such that your strategy is the best response to everyone else's strategy. So what does that mean? It means you assume that you understand what everyone else in this game is going to do, and then you respond to that. And whatever your best response is, as long as what you do is the best response, and each player satisfies this, then it's a Nash equilibrium. Now, this was the subject of a movie called A Beautiful Mind. If you haven't seen it, it's actually pretty good and pretty interesting. They do moderately well on describing the game theory. Not great, but not abysmal either. But the thing that I think is interesting is the movie got its title from a book, and the book got its title from an interview. And they were interviewing one of John Nash's colleagues, and the reason the movie is called A Beautiful Mind is his colleague, they asked, well, what do you think of John? And his colleague said, well, John's a son of a bitch, but he has a beautiful mind. And so then we ended up with the title A Beautiful Mind, not son of a bitch. Okay, and I think you basically can't talk about the ideas in game theory without describing the prisoner's dilemma. So the prisoner's dilemma is a particular game, and the game goes like this. There's two players. These two players have just committed a crime together, and they were apprehended by the police. The police take these two individuals to separate rooms, and the individuals each can take one of two actions. They can either the police offer them, some kind of a proposal. They say, if you rat your buddy out, we're going to give you a light sentence and let you go free, and then we're going to give him a harsh sentence if he doesn't say anything. And so so if you rat your friend out and he stays silent, you get a payoff of 4, and your friend gets a payoff of -2. If you rat each other out, you both go to jail, but with a slightly smaller sentence. And if you stay silent and he rats you out, you end up with -2, and he ends up with 4. And if you both stay silent, they don't have enough to convict you on the larger charge. And so you both get 3. So 4 is you get to walk away. 3 is you get the smaller charge. And so, in theory, the thing that, if I were going to, if we committed a crime together, one of us, let's say Hart and I committed a crime, I would tell Hart that I wanted us both to stay silent. And I'd say, look, this is the thing that gives us the best chance, because then we both get 3. Now, unfortunately, this isn't an equilibrium, because if I think I can convince Hart to stay silent, well, I actually want to rat him out, because then I don't do any time in jail. So Hart would go to jail, I walk free, and I'm good to go. Now, Hart's thinking the same thing. So he's thinking, well, I'd really like it if we could do silent, but if Chase is going to rat me out anyways, basically, I would rat him out if he stayed silent. And so the only Nash equilibrium in this game is for us to rat each other out and both end up charged. And so I think this is, the first time you see this is always a little bit surprising, just because it seems, the best outcome is overall is clearly this both stay silent, but it's just unsustainable given the structure of this game. So can we change the game to get us both to stay silent, to get us to cooperate? And there's 2 ways to do this. And this tells you a lot about why criminal organizations operate the way they do, maybe. The first way that you can get the prisoners to cooperate is you can change the payoff structure. So if you change the payoff structure such that anyone who rats someone out is then punished ex post by the organization, more harshly than the cops would punish you, well, now what you've done is you've changed these payoffs right here, this rat someone out. And that can quickly, depending on the punishment that you choose, get people to both stay silent. So this is kind of the extreme version. Another way that you can convince the prisoners to cooperate is by allowing them to play this game repeatedly, indefinitely. So imagine that we allow the players to play the prisoner's dilemma repeatedly and that they discount the future at delta. Can we get cooperation? And the answer is yes. So consider the following strategy. You stay silent if your partner has stayed silent in the past, but as soon as they've ratted you out once, you always rat them out. So then the payoff from both staying silent becomes this present discounted sum from 0 to infinity of delta to the t times 3, which is just 3 over 1 minus delta. And the payoff to ratting someone out then becomes, for one period, you get a payoff of 4 because they went to jail and you walked away free. But then forevermore, you get delta t times -1, which is -1 over 1 minus delta. So with delta equals 0, you would want to still rat someone out because that's the case in which you basically don't value the future at all. And as delta gets really close to 1, then 3 over 1 minus something close to 1 gets really, really big. And -1 over 1 minus something close to 1 gets really, really negative. So there's some delta between 0 and 1 such that you prefer to cooperate. And the trick in a repeated game is just to make sure that you both have enough patience that you're willing to cooperate. So repeated games are cool. And I think the takeaway that we want from this particular game is that payoffs in the future can be a powerful tool to getting people to act a particular way today.
For the payoff, why is it that if you rat and your partner stays silent, your payoff is 4 instead of 3?
So partially by like we want to eliminate the choice to both cooperate. So this is like by design, but the story behind it goes, if you rat and your partner stays silent, we're going to give you a really light sentence or maybe let you walk away free. And your partner's going to have to go to jail for the full crime. Whereas if you both stay silent, they convict you on a slightly less serious charge.
Okay.
And you both go to jail, but maybe it's not as good as walking away.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense.
So often these kind of games resolve when it's infinite, we're repeating, right? Because if it's a known finite number, the last game, essentially, time we play, we have an incentive to rat, right? So essentially you have incentive to cheat if we know what the end game is. So say we play this game 50 times. On the 50th time, the optimal solution for me is to rat you out. And therefore, the game kind of breaks down if there's a known solution. But like there's no finite end to these games, right?
That's right.
But isn't that the way we should generally think about these the way the things we're building? It's not really an indefinite game. It doesn't seem to make sense to me because like people will just eventually pull out. If they have an incentive to get that big payoff, they'll just leave, right? Like I don't think these games are are we trying to think of it as an infinite repeating game, or are we trying to make it so like the penalty for cheating is just like so harsh that they never want to do it, even though it's like finite?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely want both. I don't think we have to necessarily think of finite as forever in the future, though. You could think about, in this case, 2 people who are committing crimes. They don't actually know how many times they're going to be caught and brought into the police station. And the fact that they think there could be times in the future means that they would be willing to cooperate, I think. And now this is me. I haven't told you a particular game or a particular structure, so it's okay to kind of call bullshit. But in my mind, I have this idea where we probabilistically repeat this game, and I think that's enough to actually gain cooperation.
Gotcha. So because we don't know when the last game will be, you could, in theory, get cooperation. It's like it's a finite, it's an infinite, but it's not infinite. Yeah,
that's right. That's my claim anyways. I haven't sat down and like written this out in a way that I'm convinced of it, but in my mind, kind of the back of the envelope calculations seem that they should work.
And I guess as this gets more complicated, it ties in with your estimates of the preferences of the other players in the game, where some people might prefer like the marshmallow test type thing. It's like, no, I'll take the one marshmallow now or not the two marshmallows later.
Yes, this definitely depends on you knowing exactly what your partner's payoffs are.
But that's part of the Nash thing, right? Is that you know what the other people are doing and you don't change your strategy, and like you don't change your strategy even if you do know, or even if you like could predict it.
That's right. Yeah, so the Nash Equilibrium makes, I think, some heroic assumptions, but that's what you have to do to make progress on a problem that's hard like this, is you're assuming that you not only know everyone else's preferences, which I guess is enough to determine their strategies, but you're assuming that you know what they're going to do and why they're going to do it to compute this Nash Equilibrium.
Yeah, because if someone acts almost probabilistically, right? So say they randomize what they do, that could also throw kind of a wrench in the whole idea of a Nash Equilibrium, right? So that actually might be optimal to say that 20% of the time you do one strategy, 80% of the time you do the other, and just you do so like by rolling a dice. But if because of that could also screw up that.
Yeah, I mean that's the optimal solution to rock paper scissors, right? Is basically the solution is to randomize 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. Because if you do anything else, your opponent is going to respond to that, and they'll change their probabilities such that they win more than half of the time. And so that's why we were careful to say a strategy can be two things. It can be a single action, aka play rock, or it can be a probability distribution over actions, which is play rock with 1/3, play paper with 1/3, and play scissors with 1/3.
And I guess if a lot of economic systems in particular add a lot of buffer for insane or irrational actors or people that place like little value on the future. Just an expectation that some number of people deviate from what's good for themselves.
Yeah, I think typically you would do that by adding players to the game who maybe have a low delta. And so because they don't account for the future very well, they're going to take actions that are more myopic. You can also just add people who don't optimize at all, right? So you could just say there's a, there's a criminal, and this criminal always keeps his mouth shut no matter what. No one knows why, because it's not optimal according to the structure of the game, but that's his strategy, and he doesn't ever change that strategy. So you can bake in assumptions like that. You definitely want to be partners with that guy forever, because then
criminal who always brags because they want notoriety. Don't be partners with that guy.
Don't be partners with that guy. That's right.
Is in this specific example, isn't it guaranteed that some of the two will eventually rat? Because like the payoff they get is the tails of the payoff they get is smaller and smaller.
So that's why this particular strategy is successful. So if you think about, so again, the tails do get smaller and smaller. But if you think about this in more of a recursive way rather than sequential, so now imagine we've played this game 100 times, and you and I go into that room, and we think we're going to play it an infinite number of times in the future going forward. Well, now we're not discounting so far away because we're in the room that day. And so we compute this present discounted value again.
But like, doesn't this converge? Like, I could technically know what I will get from here to the end of time.
Yeah. I mean, the value of this payoff is 3 over 1 minus delta.
Right.
But tomorrow, you're going to value this strategy also at 3 over 1 minus delta.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Just because tomorrow you're looking like, this is the thing that's funny about these infinite sums, is you're going to get to tomorrow, you're going to like analyze your two choices, and your choices are going to be this 3 over 1 minus delta or 4 minus 1 over 1 minus delta.
And like t starts again from 0.
That's exactly right. You can also do just like, so this is, I think, the most natural strategy to think about in the repeated game, but you can do stupid things like, you can actually do better than this. So you can do better than 3 over 1 minus delta. And I think the way that you do it is some mixture over taking turns being ratted out. So I think it basically goes, I rat you out, you stay silent, and then tomorrow you rat me out and I stay silent. And it just flip-flops back and forth, and that can allow you to do better than the 3 over 1 minus delta.
Makes sense.
Yeah, so if you're interested in this, I do think I have a lecture somewhere online about this repeated game. Okay. Yeah, so I think these repeated games are super interesting. But again, the takeaway here, just kind of broadly, is the future can be a powerful tool to influence behavior today. So let's talk through another game, and I've kind of modified it for our excellent crypto audience. So typically they do some kind of like political voting, but this is way more interesting. So imagine you have a town of 100 people, and they have to coordinate on which digital currency they're going to use in their town. And they can either use Bitcoin or they can use ETH. Let's say that 75 people in the town prefer ETH and 25 people in the town prefer Bitcoin. Your payoff is 1 if your preferred currency is chosen and 0 otherwise. What's the Nash equilibrium? Does someone want to take a guess?
Everybody votes for ETH. 100 votes for ETH, 0 votes for Bitcoin.
I think I've told this story to Matt before. So the one that people typically guess first is the Nash equilibrium, in which 75 people vote for ETH and 25 people vote for Bitcoin, and you just vote for your preferred currency. Then ETH is chosen and the town uses ETH. So I think this is the natural Nash equilibrium that you would think of first, unless you're Matt and you've heard me tell this story before. Or maybe Matt doesn't remember and he's just really clever. I think that's likely too.
Unlikely. I probably just internalized it last time you told me.
Well, you learned something. Congratulations, Matt.
This is baked into our commit reveal cycle, so it's ingrained by like the practical we're taking.
Actually, that's a
Every
good
week.
point. Like, we think about this a lot because this is how governance votes work right now.
Yeah.
Right. Like, even if you don't like the governance thing, you know everybody else is going to vote a certain way, so you vote that way anyway. That's a great point, John.
Yeah.
So
there's 2 Nash equilibriums here.
Well, there's a lot more than that. You can basically, the only thing that's not a Nash equilibrium is having 50 people vote for ETH and 50 people vote for Bitcoin. Because then, because then you're always going to want to like flip the equality if you can. So if you're the marginal vote, you're obviously going to vote for your preferred currency. But in any other case, because you're not going to affect your payoff, you don't care. And so what that means is that the following is Nash equilibrium. All 100 people vote for Bitcoin, and the town uses Bitcoin as its currency. So remember, a Nash equilibrium just says that an individual can't want to deviate from the strategy. And so imagine one of these people who prefers ETH. Well, if they change their vote from Bitcoin to ETH, it doesn't actually affect their payoff. And so they're indifferent between voting for ETH or Bitcoin. And that means that this kind of strange case in which all 100 people vote for Bitcoin and the town uses Bitcoin as its currency is a Nash equilibrium. Lots of really good game theorists really disliked this Nash equilibrium. And they've spent so as soon as they realized this was a Nash equilibrium, they started saying, well, we need better ideas of, we need better equilibrium ideas.
Chase, Is the reason this is a Nash equilibrium is because only one person changing wouldn't actually affect it. But if 26 people changed it, it would actually be a better outcome, right? For them to choose ETH instead.
Yeah, you'd need 51 from this particular equilibrium, but you have exactly the right idea. Is if you could get more than one person. So some people went down this like route of like collusional equilibria, where if you can get like subgroups of this game to change their strategies. So basically Nash equilibria, but by groups. But the way we're going to solve it is, this was one of my favorite ideas from game theory when I took game theory. And they call it trembling hand equilibrium.
Chase, could I just ask a real quick question here?
Uh-huh.
Is the payout based on your preferred vote? Is the preferred vote always, your preferred currency? Is the preferred currency always the same as what you voted on?
No.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, so this particular equilibrium right here, where all 100 people vote for Bitcoin, 75 people voted for a currency that they actually didn't prefer.
I see.
And then the town uses Bitcoin, and their payoff is 0, even though they hypothetically, like this first equilibrium where the 75 people who prefer ETH voted for ETH, gave them a better payoff.
And so we could imagine that even if the 75-25 was true, if there was like a Schelling point around Bitcoin, you could actually see everyone voting for Bitcoin, even though everyone happened to prefer ETH, assuming this was uncoordinated, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that would be the story, I think, behind this particular equilibrium.
Right, yeah.
So this equilibrium should make you a little bit uncomfortable, but it's kind of fun that someone thought of this game and was like, well, what happens now? And then people thought about this for years. But again, so the equilibrium concept that I like to solve this particular problem is one called trembling hand perfect equilibrium. And a trembling hand equilibrium is, consider a perturbed game. We'll call it gamma sub epsilon. And in this perturbed game, individuals are only allowed to play mixed strategies, and they're forced to play every action with at least probability epsilon. Then a Nash equilibrium is trembling hand perfect if the Nash equilibrium is a Nash equilibrium in the sequence of perturbed games generated by the limit of epsilon going to 0, gamma sub epsilon. So how does this help us? Well, we've now basically assumed the reason they call it trembling hand is because they think about I think they were thinking about chess originally or something like that, where a player wants to make a particular move, but their hand trembles. And so they don't make the move that they intended, they accidentally do something else. So now we have 100 people in the town, we have the 75 prefer ETH, 25 prefer Bitcoin. But now each person could accidentally vote for a different outcome. So in the case where we have 100 people voting for Bitcoin, every person could probabilistically accidentally vote for ETH. And because of that, if you prefer ETH, so what's your individual payoff? It's the probability that more than 50 people vote for Bitcoin times 0, plus the probability that more than 50 people vote for ETH times 1. Now, by maximizing the probability that you vote for ETH, you actually can increase the probability that ETH is the winner. And so this actually eliminates all of these quote unquote unnatural strategies where people are voting for something that they don't prefer.
Wait, something doesn't quite make sense to me. Isn't it still pretty, like if I know, maybe it's a knowledge thing, but I assumed that like the town generally knows that, let's say 75 people generally like deep down prefer ETH and like 25 people deep down prefer Bitcoin.
Uh-huh.
Right? So if I kind of have that general knowledge of the proportions, wouldn't I know that like wouldn't I still think it's a high probability that ETH wins? So wouldn't everybody still vote for like ETH in that case, because they say it's a much higher, even if it's not certain that ETH will win, it's a much higher probability that it wins?
So you vote for your preferred thing because you think there's a chance that everyone makes a mistake.
But getting my preferred currency, I don't get a payoff for that, do I? I only get a payoff for voting with a majority, right?
No, in this case, you get a payout if the town uses your preferred currency.
So even if you vote for the majority, if you preferred the other currency, you don't get a payoff. It's like if you like elected like the wrong person, then you're like, oh crap. I mean, like they won, but you didn't want that.
That's right.
I see. So I see. So you're saying I get payoff if the one that I prefer deep down. I thought that it was just if you vote with the majority.
No, yeah. So your payoff is 1 if you get your preferred currency and 0 if you get the other currency.
I see. So I don't even understand why people would vote for their, maybe the first example doesn't make sense to me anymore. Okay. We can move on.
No, this is fine. I think this is interesting. So the reason it's a Nash equilibrium is because if all 100 people vote for Bitcoin, it's a Nash equilibrium because you individually, Matt, who prefers ETH, even if you changed your vote to ETH, it wouldn't change your payoff. And so it's you're indifferent between voting for ETH or Bitcoin under this strategy. And so it's the fact that no one person can actually change the outcome.
But why would I vote for Bitcoin in that case? Like, how is that a Nash equilibrium if I'm indifferent to my choice?
Because you're indifferent.
Interesting. I thought a Nash equilibrium meant that, like, I see. You're saying there's like many equilibria. It doesn't matter what I vote.
I could give you any number of people except 50-50, I think.
I see. That makes sense.
I have 2 questions. So say the payout is negative. Does this fail? And my second question is, it assumes perfect information. If information on preferences is imperfect, does this trembling hand break down as well?
In the first case, it doesn't matter what this second payoff is, so it could be as negative as you'd like it to be. But the fact that you've already assumed that the strategy is the 100 people vote for Bitcoin, you individually cannot change what the outcome is going to be, which means you're going to be indifferent between voting for ETH or Bitcoin, even if you prefer ETH. Now, in the second, with the imperfect information, I suspect that goes farther towards breaking this. I'd have to think more carefully about what it means in a setting like this. But yeah.
Yeah.
Bye, David.
No, fair enough. And even like preferences, right? It also assumes preferences never change over time.
Yep.
Which is, of course, not a good, is a poor assumption economists make to make their models work really well.
Yeah, you have to start somewhere.
No, for sure.
Yeah, and so again, not changing over time. This particular model is just one shot. There's no idea of time. It's just this happens all at once.
And I guess in the political context, this is also like the choice between voting or not voting. So if you know that your town overwhelmingly prefers ETH, then that might actually lead you to like not vote. And so then people who are trying to rally you need to make it seem like, you know, everybody else has their stuff together on the other side and your side's going soft, even though like the odds really are in your favor.
If you did something like add a cost to vote, I'd be interested what can be supported. My suspicion is you could still kind of get whatever you wanted, but you might get a certain set of people that choose not to vote. But yeah, that's another interesting
if you like change people's ideas of the probability of like the other side voting or their side coming out to vote. And so you get like a lot of like metagaming around politics of like, you know, either there's like a lot of like fake voters that are going to be coming out and vote, so you better go out and vote. Or like there's a lot of people being restricted from voting, so you better come out and vote. And like vice versa to like mess with like the other side where it's like, oh, this candidate's doing great. Like we don't even need to bother to vote on like a robocall.
Yeah. I suspect that a lot of these games are actually played by political entities. and it's a little bit like scary that they're that they're leveraging these tools that way. Okay, so this trembling hand, so I want to wrap up so that we don't go too far over because I know there's meetings that follow this. But basically, trembling hand equilibria helps eliminate certain outcomes that you maybe don't want as equilibrium. So now, how does this all tie to the oracle problem? In decentralized finance, the oracle problem deals with how do we reliably and truthfully bring data that doesn't naturally exist on the blockchain onto the blockchain. For example, if we have a synthetic asset on the blockchain that settles based on the price of gold, we need to know the price of gold, but this data isn't native to the blockchain, so how do we get it there? And the reason this is important is because I think everyone on this call is probably a believer, but I see a future in which there's trillions of dollars of assets on the blockchain and secured on the blockchain that are going to depend on an oracle. Now, if that oracle could be corrupted, then the attacker, based on kind of their attack vector, could make millions or maybe billions of dollars. And, I love the idea of, it would be fantastic if we could all, hug, sit around our campfire and just assume people are going to be honest. But we've already seen, and including yesterday's attack, pretty elaborate attacks that have been used to manipulate markets and run away with, literally millions of dollars on each attack. And it's totaled probably even more than hundreds of millions. But there have already been significant attacks. So it's really important that we build a hardened system that takes this risk of manipulation seriously. So what is cryptoeconomic security in the context of the oracle problem? So cryptoeconomic security involves designing systems that are secured by economic incentives. And this means that we need to design a system for an oracle that the cost of corrupting the system is higher than the profit one could earn from this corruption. And the best way to analyze whether the system achieves its goals is to analyze it via game theory. I think there are two approaches that have currently been taken towards the oracle problem. The first is an autonomous system that relies on participants to run data nodes. These data nodes retrieve data from online sources, and if a particular price is disputed, then it appeals to a second layer of data nodes. So you have kind of, I think Matt put it best when he said turtles all the way down. The second is what I think is the optimistic system, and it relies on DeFi participants requesting and uploading prices on their own, but it's then secured by a system of bots that look for discrepancies. And in the case of a discrepancy, it turns to a vote system where holders of the token, of a particular oracle token, specify what the price should have been. We talked briefly about what it would take to corrupt each of these two systems. And you can go back and read through these slides. I'm happy to answer questions. But then I think this is my last slide. I just want to express Uma's view, or this is my personal view of what Uma's view is on the history and future of financial contracts. We've gone from a jungle system where if I wanted your asset, I would take it, to a government-backed financial contract system where we enter into agreements and governments help enforce these agreements, sometimes at gunpoint, to what I'll call quote-unquote decentralized oracles 1.0. People won't report false prices because then they couldn't collect future payments by running their data nodes, to the optimistic decentralized oracles, which is the system is secured via economic incentives, explicitly ensuring that it's more expensive to corrupt the system than one could earn in profits by doing so. Now, UMA builds optimistic decentralized oracles, and I think appropriately we believe this is the future of financial contracts. The end. This is my TED Talk. Thanks for coming.
Well done, Chase.
And I guess one interesting thing with this in the UMA context is we think a lot about how a data feed could be corrupted too. So in step 4, I don't know if that's like an explicit requirement that it be too expensive to like corrupt a feed, but it sort of is. Like you're able to use human judgment And certain things, like certain data feeds, just won't be served because we're like, no, that one's easy to mess with.
Yeah, so I think two things. Three, I think the type of oracles done in decentralized oracles 1.0 can't account for the fact that their source could be corrupted. So they're just reading a number from somewhere on the internet or from some point of truth that they've identified. And I think these optimistic decentralized oracles, just in general, they're more quick to move to a dispute, where if you see a price that's reported by someone that seems inaccurate, even if that's what your online source says, you can dispute just to ensure that it's secure, just to express that uncertainty. And yeah, I think the human element is important, because I think humans are better at computers at kind of walking through what could have happened.
Surely the first one, before government-backed financial contracts, is really socially backed financial contracts. Like in a kind of, cooperative sense, you wouldn't want to upset the members of your family or your community or your neighbours by breaching unwritten rules. So actually people are acting optimistically, but they don't have any guarantees.
I think that's probably fair. I think there's probably still some idea in a lot of those systems where if you do something wrong, there is a punishment. Whether that's being thrown out of your family or your tribe, or so I'd agree that's unique from government-backed financial contracts, and that it's at the intersection of, I think, optimistic and government-backed.
And then I think just for number 4, an interesting philosophical question is whether an optimistic oracle should agree to deliver a price feed for a market price that could be manipulated. Because that was a thing that came up in the most recent round of attacks, where it wasn't, strictly speaking, an incorrect price. It was a manipulated price, but the oracle delivered the price as it was. That's just what the market said.
Right.
So like the cost of manipulating that market was lower. Like the profit from manipulating that market price was a lot higher than like what you would have made, I guess, as like an oracle provider. And it also doesn't even really matter, because you're not the oracle provider in that case. You're just operating off to the side, and the oracle is like, well, the price doubled and now it didn't. And that's true. But so like, should the oracle even be getting involved in that point? Or just say like, here's a kind of sketchy price feed. We'll tell you what the price is, but no promises that it'll be good for, your well-being.
Yeah. No, I think that's the ability to pick and choose what things an oracle is willing to secure is important. I think that's a great point.
At the risk of making this a little longer, I have a very strong view on this, in that, I guess for obvious reasons, I think it's like a fallacy. I think it's just like an easy, it like takes a lot of pressure off oracle providers, but it's like not realistic to say, oh, the oracles don't need to worry about manipulation. Like the fiat world figured this out a long time ago, that if you have a futures price and you are margining that future, or you're requiring people to put up collateral based on the price of some other asset, the spot market, or even the price of that futures market itself, you have to be able to take manipulation out of the equation. You have to be able to roll things back if you think they're manipulated. You have to be able to have recourse for manipulation. And the same thing goes with the DeFi protocols. You're securing like billions of dollars in value, and like no market is going to be liquid enough to ensure that no one can manipulate it enough. Like if I'm locking up $4 billion of USDC, there's no market that's liquid enough to protect $4 billion of value with its liquidity. There's just like no market that can be resistant to manipulation at that level. You can't support like the lending markets of the entire United States on I don't know, on like simple like trading markets on like the NYSE or something. Like it just doesn't work. The markets are not liquid enough to do that. So you need some way to weed out manipulation. And if the Oracle doesn't do it, then no one else is going to do it. So I think the Oracle must weed out manipulation if you want to have oracles in DeFi at all. Or else you're just going to continue to see attacks, exactly like what happened. And this attack was on one exchange, but like even if you aggregate across like 3 or 4 exchanges, it doesn't take that much capital. It doesn't take $1 billion of capital to move the price of pretty much any crypto asset up or down on 5 different exchanges at once. It's just not that hard. So I don't know. I like really, really, really don't buy the argument that like an oracle can just absolve itself of the responsibility to de-manipulate prices.
And I guess from a game theory perspective, this ties back into like a little bit of uncertainty about how the oracle is going to respond to your manipulation. With like certain types of oracles, you could say like, well, they're 100% going to just deliver the manipulated market price. But others, there's some ambiguity that like this decision-making mechanism might look at this and say this was manipulated. And so by adding that fuzziness, it's kind of discourages you from doing certain kinds of attacks unless you have some reason to think that you can convince the voters to go a certain way, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that's powerful about this optimistic idea is like if in equilibrium the voters are going to do a good job, then it's never profitable to propose a bad price. And so then hypothetically, like these voters are here for kicks and giggles. Like they don't actually ever have to participate because anyone who proposes a bad price expects that it's going to be shot down. And so this is one of the ideas from equilibrium that I love is just like this idea is you don't necessarily need the stick. You just need the threat of a stick.
Yeah, but it's also interesting because the definition of what constitutes a bad price can be up in the air. So you could look at that and say, like, technically speaking, this was traded on one market and that was the price on that one market, but it's a bad price because it was clearly like manipulated. And so you don't know exactly how you're going to land in the case of like I don't know, like a sketchy price to some form of sketchiness.
To go one step further with that same idea, it's not only never like the fuzziness and uncertainty means that it's a much worse strategy to propose bad prices. It's also a bad strategy to manipulate the thing in the first place, right? Because you don't know if you're going to be able to make your money back. So like these people are investing, $1 million of capital to potentially profit $1 billion of capital. But if you don't know that you're going to make the billion, that million is a really bad investment, right? If your probability is only, if there's only a 50% probability you're going to make the billion, you might not do it.
Yeah, and I think some of these attacks too, I think one of them, I might get this wrong, but like one of the attacks, they basically invested like $1 billion via like flash loans and stuff in order to make 40 million. So like obviously that's too much capital to risk if there's any chance at all that the price is going to come back and say like you manipulated it. Now you've just lost 960 million.
Right, exactly. I mean, flash loans don't even allow you to invest it unless you can immediately make it back. But yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You're 100% right. Like all this stuff kind of falls away if you add uncertainty to the equation, it really is cool how it goes back to that kind of trembling hand idea.
Okay, well, I guess let's wrap this up. If people have ideas, if they like pieces of this, I'll put the slides online somewhere. But I'm always happy to talk economics and game theory and asset pricing. I think they're all excellent topics.